Welcome to Messy Minded, a podcast for curious weirdos who enjoy true stories with the odd side quest. I'm Jess, and today we're riding the coattails of the last episode that was on the invisible rules of talking by taking a look at the idioms we use. For instance, the phrase riding the coattails that I just used, the phrase became especially popular in American politics during the 1800s. A popular presidential candidate might help lesser-known politicians from the same party get elected too. Those smaller candidates were said to win on the coattails of the better-known politician, meaning that they were pulled into victory by someone else's popularity. It's actually a really vivid metaphor, someone hanging on to another person's coat while being pulled forward through life, which also explains why it's usually a little insulting because it implies dependence and borrowed success. At some point in my life, I apparently learned that if someone lets the cat out of the bag, they've revealed the secret. That barking up the wrong tree means pursuing the wrong idea. That being happy as a clam is good for some reason. If you really stop to think about it, and I encourage you to, especially if you're listener Jake Streeter, the English language is a delightful disaster and nobody stopped to explain why any of this should make sense. We mostly just accept it. We nod along like perfectly sane adults while saying things like, well, I guess I missed the boat, so now it'll cost me an arm and a leg, but hey, sometimes it's close but no cigar. Please enjoy. This is the Idioms episode. Once I started digging into idioms, I noticed human beings apparently cannot describe even the mildest inconvenience without referencing war, execution, injury, or death. We don't just say, that was difficult. No, we have more flair than that. We say, I bit the bullet, he kicked the bucket, I'm hanging on by the skin of my teeth, and you don't want this smoke. We're having casual conversations that are secretly full of centuries-old metaphors wandering around unsupervised. So I guess we should start there, with a deeply concerning number of idioms built around pain and suffering. Today, if someone says, I guess I'll bite the bullet, what they mean is, I don't want to do this, but I'm going to endure it anyway. Just get it done. I saw that the phrase is usually linked to battlefield surgery in Britain before modern anesthesia. The story goes that wounded soldiers would literally bite down on a bullet during amputations or other horrifying procedures to stop themselves from screaming or biting through their own tongues. Now, historians debate on how common this actually was. Sometimes patients bit leather straps, cloth, wood, or whatever was nearby. I feel like if you found like a softer wood, it would be really satisfying to bite into. Although I assume that satisfaction would be short-lived as soon as the knives came out. But the general imagery is accurate enough. Pain was coming, and unfortunately there wasn't exactly a morphine button involved. Imagine hearing, good news, Private, we're removing the leg. Bad news is our anesthesiologist is named Whiskey. Humans throughout history have been disturbingly casual about unimaginable pain. The American Civil War alone involved thousands of amputations performed at terrifying speed. Surgeons sometimes operated in blood-soaked tents while piles of limbs accumulated outside. So when we now say, ugh, I guess I'll bite the bullet and answer these emails, we're technically invoking emergency wartime surgery. Language is amazing. Then we have kick the bucket, one of the weirdest euphemisms for death ever created. At least we aren't around to know people said this about us. Not that it's an insult, but it feels a little too casual of a way to say that someone died. Because that's it just means to die. But where it came from, no one knows for certain. Which you're probably going to hear a lot in this episode. The earliest recorded usage that I could find was from back in 1700s England, though. I don't know where I picked this up, so I might have just imagined and assumed that this was in reference to executions, but now that I think on it for more than a second, what I was imagining was hangings where the block the condemned were standing on gets kicked out so their weight is fully taken on by the rope. But now I realize the phrase would have been, his bucket was kicked, rather than he kicked the bucket. Who kicked this bucket? It seems to be very disputed, but one theory connects the phrase to animal slaughter. In some older traditions, animals were hung from a wooden beam or frame, sometimes called a bucket. During the slaughter, understandably, the animal might kick violently. Another theory is a little closer to what I was imagining originally. It involves suicide by hanging, where somebody standing on a bucket literally kicks it away. Cheerful, I know. Not all these idioms are going to be fun, guys. Since there's evidence out there that the word bucket may have referred to a beam rather than the container we picture today, this phrase may have originally sounded less absurd to people hearing it centuries ago. Still, somehow we've collectively decided we'll use this one casually forever. Oh, did you hear Carl kick the bucket? Speaking of idioms that aren't fun, I'm here to go on record that I personally dislike this one. By the skin of your teeth. Ew. This one is especially ridiculous because your teeth do not have skin. Regardless, I've always found this one to be gross, just because it brings to my mind the image of overgrown gums. Are they gooms? Which then my brain tries to problem solve away and makes me think of ways to trim them down. Ugh, ugh. But by the skin of your teeth means barely surviving or escaping, barely succeeding. This well-worn little nugget actually comes from the Bible. Bibble bibble. Specifically, the book of Job. Job, after losing basically everything in a horrifying cascade of suffering, says, "I am escaped with the skin of my teeth." Only, it would have been in Hebrew. This guy had biblical cosmic nightmare levels of bad luck. According to the story, Satan basically argues to God,
Well, of course Job is faithful. His life is great.
God did not care for that attitude, so Job gets tested. Horrifically. Raiders come and steal or destroy his livestock. Servants are killed. His children die when the house collapses during a storm. Then Job himself is struck with painful boils across his body. Basically, his entire life detonates one tragedy after another. At one point, he's sitting in ashes, scraping his skin with broken pottery, while his friends repeatedly imply this might be somehow his own fault. Great friends, huh? Which feels like the world's oldest recorded example of, have you tried just not being sad? And during all this suffering, Job says, "I am escaped with the skin of my teeth," which is an interesting sentence that even biblical scholars have debated on what the heck he meant by that. Since teeth don't have skin, the phrase likely meant, "I escaped by almost nothing," and that's still exactly how we use it today. I made it to work by the skin of my teeth. I passed math by the skin of my teeth. It does make me think, though. Like, have you been talking to someone and said something that came out wrong and doesn't make much sense, but the person you're talking to just nods along like they totally get it? Maybe Job was just tired and blurted the skin of my teeth line. If he somehow knew we still used it thousands of years later, do you suppose he'd be embarrassed about it or just thrilled to still be quoted? Still got it. This next one I do like. Or dual like? If someone throws down the gauntlet today, what do you picture? When is the last time you even saw a gauntlet? What's a gauntlet? Well, glad you asked. A gauntlet was a medieval armored glove worn by knights. If you're a knight in this scenario, lucky you. If you, Sir Upset McFussybritches, wanted to challenge someone to combat, you would literally throw your glove onto the ground in front of them. If they picked it up, challenge accepted. Can you imagine? I mean, it seems a little formal when compared to today, where a guy might invite another guy to step outside for a fight. But from what I saw, it was meant to be formal for medieval times. A gauntlet was thrown down as a grave insult, and could only be answered with personal combat, often called trial by combat, and it was often a matter of life or death. This was a legal sort of challenge where the righteous winner would be chosen by God. And God was kind of expected to physically intervene to reveal the truth of whatever the offense was. It was believed that God would not allow a liar to succeed. If you were innocent, God would grant you unnatural strength or protection to defeat your opponent, even if they were stronger than you. So David and Goliath would be the ultimate example of God favoring the righteous. Obviously, the fight would have to come to an end, so people had to come up with some rules around it all. A fighter could submit by crying "Craven," which admitted defeat and acknowledged that their opponent is right. These fights usually continued until one party was physically unable to continue because of their injuries, or someone died. Bummer. While killing your opponent wasn't the goal of these trials, death was a common side effect since these weren't slap fights. Weapons like swords, axes, or maces were used. If you get struck with one of those in any important area, that's gonna suck. Ouch! And no antibiotic, so even if it was just a flesh wound, it could still be a real problem. Anyone else thinking of the Black Knight and Monty Python's Holy Grail right now? I might have to dig that movie out tonight. If nothing else, when the fight continued on until sunset without a victor, some trials ended by proclaiming the defendant to be innocent. Like the street lamps of my childhood, letting the kids know it's time to go home for dinner. That's enough, guys. Today, arguments happen through Twitter, group chats, or someone typing "source" in all caps beneath an article about cheese or whatever. But medieval people? No. They said, "I dispute your honor, Jeffrey," and then launch a metal glove at your feet like a Shakespearean Pokemon trainer. Now let's jump from medieval knights and biblical poetry straight into modern slang. How about the phrase, "You don't want this smoke"? Today, it basically means you don't want this conflict, or you're not prepared for the consequences of messing with me. It can mean an actual threat, a challenge, a competition, sometimes over something as minor or as an aggressive online argument about whether pineapple belongs on pizza. And unlike other idioms where historians stare into the distance like exhausted detectives, this one's origins are actually fairly traceable. The phrase comes from African American slang and became especially widespread through the Southern hip-hop culture in the late 1990s and early 2000s. In slang, smoke has already been associated with gunfire and violence. Smoke that guy. And you can kind of see the metaphor evolve in real time. Where there's smoke, something bad is probably happening. And then over time, do you want the smoke became shorthand for do you want this fight? And eventually, you don't want this smoke became a warning. This was language evolution happening live in front of us. Older axioms can feel ancient and disconnected from modern life, but this one reminds me that language is alive and always reinventing itself. Through rap lyrics, internet culture, sports, memes, TikTok, gaming streams, and everyday conversation. Which means someday, centuries from now, historians may be explaining to students that early 21st century humans communicated social dominance through smoke-based metaphors, while arguing online about which breakfast cereal mascots were truly great. Now here's one that sounds aggressively hostile for absolutely no reason. Break a leg. The phrase means good luck, which raises an obvious question: who decided the best way to encourage performers with what sounds like a threat? This phrase is most strongly associated with theater culture, especially in Britain and the United States during the late 1800s and early 1900s. And while there are multiple theories about where it came from, the most widely accepted explanation involves good old superstition. Superstition! Ghost lights, forbidden words, rituals, lucky charms, specific pre-show routines, and one long-standing belief was that directly wishing someone good luck could actually jinx the performance. So instead, people wished each other the opposite: break a leg. Basically reverse psychology for haunted drama kids. At least they stopped at orthopedic injury instead of wishing death upon each other. Small blessing. Now there are other theories. One claims it refers to performers bowing so deeply after a successful performance, they bent or broke the line of the leg. Another suggests it refers to crossing the leg line of the stage curtain, meaning you actually got called onto stage and therefore had a successful night. Historians aren't completely certain which explanation is correct, so I can't say that I am, but I choose to believe the superstitious explanation just because it's more fun. Toe the line is one of those phrases most people use without ever picturing what it actually means. I know I didn't until like last week. Today, if someone tells you to toe the line, they mean what they want you to do is follow the rules. Behave properly and conform to expectations. Yes, sir. And unlike some idioms, this one's origins are actually fairly straightforward. It likely comes from military drills in Britain during the 1700s and 1800s. Soldiers were expected to line up with their toes placed exactly against a marked line for inspection or formation. Stand straight, feet aligned, no messing around, guys. There's also some evidence the phrase may have been reinforced through boxing, where fighters had to place their toes at a starting line before a match began. Either way, the core idea stayed the same: discipline through physical positioning. Entire societies built around stand where I told you to stand. And over time, the phrase evolved into something broader: social conformity. Do what's expected and don't challenge authority. Which means every time your boss tells employees to toe the line, they're accidentally speaking like an exhausted 18th century drill sergeant. Now, let's talk about an idiom that I don't think I've ever used, but it sounds dirty enough that I genuinely assumed I knew where it came from. Balls out. Today it usually means going all out, full speed, giving maximum effort with flecks of recklessness perhaps. Like that guy went balls out on Halloween decorations. And if you're thinking, surely this has something to do with testicles, balls, nuts, family jewels, the berries, the old coin purse, the plums, avocados, trouble nuggets, yam bag, love spuds, bean bags, the boy, ham lanterns, giblets, marbles, the downstairs council, nads, the old wrinkled walnuts. Is it just me, or do you also think it's a bit weird and slightly concerning that we have so many produce-based euphemisms for such a thing? The forbidden produce, one might say. But anyway, if you did think the phrase balls out referred to wedding tackle, you're sharing a thought process with me and most of the internet. But despite this one feeling obvious, historians actually think balls out doesn't refer to the dangly bits at all. One popular myth claims it came from old airplane throttle levers with round ball-shaped knobs on the end. Supposedly, when pilots pushed them fully forward for maximum speed, the balls were literally all the way out. Cool story, but probably not true. Another theory traces it back to steam engine governors. Hello, governor! That had these strange spinning arms with heavy metal balls attached. As the engine sped up, the balls would swing farther and farther outward from the machine. The swinging arms were attached to a lever that engaged the throttle, decreasing the amount of steam feeding into the engine. If you don't know, the throttle is just engine breathing control, a flap that controls airflow. Anyway, this one may actually have merit because the phrase, historically, seems less connected to anatomy and more to machinery operating at maximum force. Sorry to disappoint y'all. After all that, the phrase isn't as salty as it seems. It's probably just a steam engine reference. It was worth the walk, though. Now, after all that death, battlefield injury, medieval combat, and smoke-based threats, let's move on to something a bit lighter. Animals, weather, and us talking monkeys assigning emotional states to shellfish. Once you start looking at animal idioms, you realize something pretty quickly. Early humans spent a lot of time staring at animals and coming to some fairly wild conclusions. And fair enough, Netflix wasn't available yet. Let's start with one that sounds cute, but is secretly about survival. If someone says they're happy as a clam, they just mean they're content and vibing. But the original phrase was actually happy as a clam at high tide, which is less adorable once you know why, because clams are safest at high tide. At low tide, people can walk right out, dig them up, and turn them into chowder. At high tide, the clam is covered by water and require much more effort to reach. So the phrase basically meant that guy is relaxed as a creature who currently cannot be taken and eaten. It seems to have originated in the northeastern United States during the 1800s, especially around New England, which makes sense given how much time New Englanders would have spent around clams. Enough to develop opinions about their emotional well-being, apparently. And I kind of love that this became a saying because it tells us that we will anthropomorphize absolutely anything. Cats? Sure. Dogs? Obviously. But at some point, someone looked at a shell lying in wet sand and thought, that little guy seems deeply at peace. Pleased as punch, you might say. I also didn't know where this one came from either, so I prayed to the Google gods. And it turns out that this is a reference to the Punch and Judy puppet shows, which was sort of the reality TV of 16th century Europe. Punch started out as this Italian puppet dude, but he evolved into the English version, Mr. Punch, in the 1600s and 1700s. Punch was kind of a monster. The puppet shows were these slapsticky comedies where Punch would hit people with a stick, fought authority figures, sometimes even threw a baby or battled a crocodile, and occasionally Punch even defeated death itself, like some creepy, red-nosed, leering little goblin fueled entirely by violence. And after successfully causing a lot of upset and chaos, Punch would often react with enormous satisfaction. Hence, pleased as Punch. Which means every time we use this idiom, we're accidentally referencing a weird little sociopathic puppet from centuries-old street theater. Now this next one comes from hunting culture, barking up the wrong tree. It essentially means that you're mistaken, you're pursuing the wrong idea, accusing the wrong person, or looking for answers in the wrong place. The phrase originated in the United States during the 1800s, especially in regions where hunting with dogs was common. I should mention that where the British made hunting with dogs formal, upper-class events, the U.S. was more like practical frontier hunting. Think squirrels, raccoons, possums. So the doggos would chase their targeted prey up a tree, let's say a squirrel. This squirrel had been minding his own business just a minute ago, just collecting food to bring home to his squirrel wife Cheryl. Cheryl had been in a mood that morning, but no more than what was usual when she was peckish. Now don't you think that they were desperate. They had food at home, but they had agreed not to dip into their storage to make sure they had a bounty for the cold months. So each day he'd go looking for food, and today he was almost ready to go home again, until he heard a distant rhythmic thunder of paws hitting dirt in terrifying synchronization, like the world's angriest little cavalry unit was closing in. Behind him were beagles or coonhounds or whatever horrifying dog-based death squad Frontier America had assembled that day. But our squirrel nimbly escaped by jumping to another branch and leaping to a nearby tree without the dogs noticing. Meanwhile, the snitching pups remained below, ratting out the location they thought Mr. Squirrel ran off to, so that their owners would know it's time to administer the treats, just aggressively barking at an empty tree with their entire chest, which probably still describes a shocking percentage of internet arguments today. I remember a middle school friend's mom said this one all the time. Hold your horses. And it's one of the most straightforward idioms on my list. It basically means calm down, slow down, be patient. And yes, it literally comes from horses. Before cars, if your horses got too excited or moved too quickly, that was a genuine issue. You could crash your wagon, tip over cargo, or get launched directly into a muddy ditch because your horse, Biscuit, saw something unsettling in a bush. The phrase started appearing in English-speaking countries in the 1800s, especially in America where horse travel was still common. I enjoy that we still use this phrase despite most modern people having little to no interaction with horses whatsoever. Some office manager named Denise is out there saying, "Hey, hold your horses, Brad," while Brad has not even seen a horse in person, let alone owned one to restrain. What are you talking about, Denise? Now this one has literary pedigree. Wild goose chase means a pointless pursuit, usually unplanned chaos that's unlikely to pan out as hoped. Ooh, pan out, real quick. That comes from panning for gold in the 1800s California gold rush. Hopeful miners would scoop sediment and water into shallow pans, then swirl everything around, hoping heavier gold flakes would settle at the bottom. If you actually found gold, the pan panned out. If not, you were just crouched by a river, swirling a muddy dish for hours. Anywho, back to those wild geese. This one can actually be traced fairly confidently to Shakespeare, specifically Romeo and Juliet. Mercutio uses the phrase during a rapid-fire conversation about horse riding and racing formations. The original meaning may have referred to a kind of horse race, where riders followed one another in irregular patterns resembling migrating geese. Over time, the phrase evolved into meaning a hopeless search. And geese are pretty much the perfect animal for this metaphor because geese themselves seem fundamentally committed to pointlessness. I don't know if you have geese in the part of the world you live in, but up close, they're like moody little dinosaurs. They scream, they chase people for no reason. They look like they know state secrets, but really the secret is that there's now green poop everywhere, so watch your step. Now, this is a weird one because people don't really agree where it came from, but I'm happy to speculate. Today we use it to tease someone who suddenly goes quiet or doesn't know what to say. Cat got your tongue? One theory links it to the cat o' nine tails, a threatening-looking multi-tailed whip used for punishment in the British Navy. Despite sounding like a children's toy from a haunted pet store, this thing was deeply unpleasant. Imagine a whip. Hang on, this music feels weird here. There we go. Anyway, imagine a whip with several heavy cords with knots tied into them, specifically to shred the skin of the person being punished. Since naval floggings could involve dozens of lashes, sometimes hundreds across multiple punishments, you'd at least have a bloody back, but you might also be left with permanent scarring. You could even die from massive blood loss, shock, or infection. So this was just bad news. The idea being that after a brutal whipping, someone might become too terrified to speak. Another theory points to ancient folklore involving cats stealing tongues as punishment for lying, gossip, or blasphemy. Ancient folklore loved this kind of thing. Mysterious punishments, creepy night creatures, and moral lessons were wrapped up in psychological horror. Somewhere centuries ago, there was probably a deeply exhausted mother saying, "If you keep back-talking me, the cat will come for your tongue," which is actually terrifying enough that I probably would have behaved. And yet, another possibility is that it was simply a Victorian-style teasing phrase directed at shy children, which feels believable because Victorian adults seemed weirdly committed to psychologically confusing children for their own entertainment. No matter the origin, though, the phrase survived. And now we say, "Cat got your tongue," as if tongue-stealing cats of any kind are a completely normal thing to reference. Here's one that may actually have stemmed from fraud. To let the cat out of the bag means to reveal a secret accidentally. One theory traces it back to old marketplaces in medieval Europe. Unscrupulous sellers might promise buyers a valuable piglet tied up in a sack, but secretly swap it for a worthless cat instead. If someone opened the bag before the deal was complete, surprise, you were almost scammed, like medieval Craigslist. The secret was exposed. The cat was out of the bag. Now, historians debate on how common this practice actually was, but the phrase itself appears in English writing in the 1700s. And strangely, the fact that humans have apparently needed anti-fraud sayings for centuries feels weirdly comforting. I'm sure you know that if it's raining cats and dogs, it's raining extremely heavily. You may have heard the famous explanation involving thatched roofs. The story goes that cats and dogs would sleep on top of old straw roofs, and during heavy rain, they supposedly slid off or fell through, which paints an incredible mental image. Unfortunately, historians aren't convinced that this actually happened often enough to inspire a phrase used across the English-speaking world. The phrase appeared in England in the 1600s and 1700s, included in writings by Jonathan Swift. He's the dude that wrote that savage political satire book called Gulliver's Travels. Some scholars think cats and dogs were sort of harbingers of chaos or violent weather. Dogs in older cities roamed in packs, barked constantly, scavenged garbage, and could be dangerous to people. Cats, especially black cats, became tied to superstition, witchcraft, nighttime mystery, and were generally considered just bad omens in parts of Europe. So some think that saying it was raining cats and dogs wasn't meant literally at all. Instead, it may have just been a metaphor for dangerous weather. Like, the sky is throwing absolute mayhem at us. Now there's one thing human beings have always excelled at, across every culture, every century, every level of technological advancement. It's making things weird socially. Because long before the internet gave us subtweets, reaction emojis, and passive-aggressive, per my email, workplace warfare, we were already masters of gossip, social humiliation, administering the side-eye, and some subtle psychological combat. And some of our idioms prove we've turned social discomfort into an art form. Let's start with one of the younger idioms in this episode, throwing shade. Throwing shade means subtly insulting someone, usually indirectly, or with enough plausible deniability that if confronted, you can still say, "What? I didn't say anything." The phrase comes from Black queer ballroom culture and African American vernacular English, often abbreviated as AAVE, particularly in the drag scene of the 1980s and 90s. It became widely known through the documentary Paris is Burning, which explored New York's ballroom culture. And shade is distinct from a direct insult. A direct insult might say, "Your outfit looks terrible." If you're throwing shade, you might say, "Wow, you are so brave for wearing that." It's elegant hostility, and linguistically, I think the metaphor is actually kind of beautiful. Light is often associated with attention, approval, warmth, so to throw shade is to block somebody's light, to dim their moment. If you were to spill the beans, it means you're revealing confidential information, usually accidentally. If you're doing it intentionally, it's spilling the tea, after all. One theory traces this phrase all the way back to ancient Greece, where beans might have been used during voting processes. Different colored beans could represent different votes, so if somebody spilled the container prematurely, oops, the secret vote was no longer secret. The phrase, "steal someone's thunder," is incredible because it might just involve one playwright becoming furious. If you steal someone's thunder, it means you take credit for someone else's idea, or overshadow them using something they created first. In the early 1700s, a playwright named John Dennis invented a new theatrical method for creating realistic thunder sound effects, using a device called a thunder run or thunder sheet style mechanism, basically early practical sound effects for theater. Apparently, Dennis was very proud of his invention. Unfortunately, his play failed, but shortly afterward, another theater company reused his thunder effect without his permission, which Dennis was totally cool with. Just kidding. According to legend, Dennis became furious and shouted, "They will not let my play run, but they steal my thunder," which is #relatable. Break the ice is one of those phrases we barely even notice anymore. Today it means making people feel more comfortable, especially in those awkward social situations, which is interesting because its roots are surprisingly old. The phrase may go all the way back to ancient shipping culture where actual ice-breaking boats kindly cleared frozen waterways so other ships could pass safely. It became a metaphor for removing tension of sorts, clearing conversational obstacles, and helping the interaction paddle along. Which makes sense to me because awkward silence can sometimes feel like trying to drag a conversation through frozen water. And over time, the phrase evolved into social language. Jokes, small talk, introductions, those weird corporate trust exercises where Sharon from accounting suddenly finds herself being asked to describe herself as a kitchen appliance. "I guess I'd be a toaster because I help warm up the office." Deborah, please. We're all just here for the mini muffins. The phrase "close but no cigar" brings a strong, sad carnival energy with it. It means you almost succeeded, but not quite. This one actually probably originated in fairs and carnival games in the late 1800s, especially in the United States, because cigars were the actual prizes, which feels a bit strange these days. Can you imagine winning a ring toss and somebody handing your child a cigar? Congratulations, Timmy. You did great at knocking over the milk bottles. Here's tobacco. Smoke 'em now that you got 'em. But back then, cigars were common prizes for adults and seen as valuable or even prestigious. So if you narrowly missed the target, close, but no cigar. No cigar for you. No bones about it, it's time to shake out whatever skeletons you have in your closet. Because having skeletons in the closet means you have some hidden secrets. Maybe shameful history or just embarrassing truths you prefer to be concealed. The phrase appeared in the 1800s. I feel like a lot of these came from like the 17 and 1800s, particularly in Britain and America. And while the exact origin isn't fully certain, many believe it's connected to medical schools for anatomy study using actual human remains. Medical schools needed cadavers and skeletons for study, but laws limited access for a long time. So this all got tangled up with grave robbing, body snatching, and widespread public horror about what might secretly be hidden behind respectable doors. There's also a broader Victorian vibe to the phrase. Respectability on the outside, but deeply unsettling things hidden beneath the surface. And the phrase survived because the metaphor works so well. Everyone has things they hide. Some were small, embarrassing old hairstyles, middle school poetry, that one Facebook status from 2009. Others slightly more skeleton adjacent. Human beings have apparently been stressed out about work for centuries. Money, exhaustion, deadlines, trying to survive economically without fully dissolving into raccoon-like panic. Our idioms around work and struggle are fascinating to me because they preserve little snapshots of how people lived. Today, bring home the bacon means earning money to support your household. One possible origin comes from medieval England, where churches occasionally awarded bacon to married couples who could swear they hadn't argued for a year and a day. Which, color me skeptical, but that feels statistically impossible. Another theory connects it more broadly to bacon itself being a valuable food. If you literally brought bacon home, you'd successfully brought home valuable food for your family. Either way, the phrase evolved into meaning financial success through hard work. Unless you're an actual pig, in which, in this case, success isn't your defining word. We also say that something cost an arm and a leg, meaning something was extremely expensive. One popular myth claims that this came from portrait painting, where portraits featuring more limbs supposedly cost more money. Probably not true. The phrase seems to appear more reliably in the United States after World War II, possibly influenced by wartime injuries and the idea of sacrifice. Even metaphorically, we instantly understand the emotional math. If something costs an arm and a leg, that's too much. Although I do appreciate how dramatically we use this phrase. I bought eggs and it cost an arm and a leg. Meanwhile, somewhere an exhausted medieval peasant is like, "You still have your limbs, Jess." I'm going to pull out all the stops and give you a few more. Did you know the phrase pulling out the stops actually comes from music? Yeah, it turns out specifically pipe organs. On a pipe organ, stops control the flow of air through the different sets of pipes, and that changes the sound of the instrument. So pulling out all the stops meant activating every possible sound at once. Over time, the phrase evolved into meaning giving maximum effort, using every available resource and going absolutely all in. Burning the midnight oil is a phrase of pure historical exhaustion. It means working or studying late into the night. Before electricity, if you stayed up reading, writing, or working, you were literally burning oil in lamps. You weren't just tired, you were actively consuming fuel to continue functioning. I'm sure we've all cut corners before, because to cut corners means doing something cheaply, carelessly, or in the easiest possible way instead of the proper way. This phrase likely emerged during the Industrial Age, especially in trades and manufacturing. If you literally cut corners in construction, tailoring, woodworking, you save time and materials, but the final product probably became weaker or lower quality. Which means this idiom is basically capitalism's eternal temptation. Do it faster, cheaper, make it good enough-ish. Now, after all this suffering, exhaustion, and financial despair, finally I can give you a more optimistic idiom, and it'll be a piece of cake. Because piece of cake means that something is easy to accomplish. This phrase became popular in the United States during the 1900s, though versions of it may go back earlier. One theory connects it to the competitions where cake was awarded as a prize, particularly cakewalk contests associated with Black African dance traditions in the 19th century. I had no idea that's where it hailed from. My association with cakewalks was the church bazaars that I participated in as a kid. I like this one because the cakewalk itself became another idiom meaning something easy. I think this one makes intuitive sense immediately. Cake is pleasurable, and it doesn't typically inspire fear unless somebody involved fondant. Because come on, fondant looks pretty, but do you really want to eat that? Give me buttercream any day. Also, if you missed the boat, you missed out on an opportunity of some sort. You arrived too late or failed to act in time. This phrase emerged from transportation, ships, ferries, trade routes, immigration, and shipping schedules. And historically, missing the boat could genuinely be devastating. You might lose money, work, travel opportunities, or your only passage somewhere important. There was no, oops, well, I'll just call an Uber. If the boat left, which is why this phrase carries such emotional weight. It doesn't just mean inconvenience, it means your opportunity is gone. Whether it's a ship leaving harbor or realizing too late that you should have bought concert tickets 6 months ago. Been there. After all this research, I came to a humbling realization. We don't merely invent bizarre phrases, we also mishear them, misquote them, misuse them, and then confidently repeat the wrong version for generations. I'm guilty of this too, and I say this all with love because language drift is completely normal. Words evolve, meanings change, people hear things incorrectly and collectively decide, yep, that's just what we're saying now. Like this isn't an idiom, but the word factoid has changed in my lifetime because it used to mean a fake fact, something made up. But now it just seems to mean a fact. Linguists even have terms for this kind of thing. One of my favorites is mondegree, which is when somebody mishears a phrase or lyric and accidentally recreates a new meaning. Like hearing Hendrix sing, "Excuse me while I kiss the sky," as, "Excuse me while I kiss this guy." That's a version with a very different energy. Let's look at a few idioms and phrases people constantly get wrong. Here's one that has launched probably 1,000 grammar arguments online. For all intensive purposes. Except that's not the phrase. I was an adult when I learned that the actual expression is "for all intents and purposes," meaning essentially, effectively, or practically speaking. This dates back to English law in the 1500s and appeared in legal language describing something functioning as though it were officially true in every practical sense. I'm just going to go ahead and blame this one on people talking fast. That's the excuse I'm using anyway. How about "I could care less"? Usually said when someone means "I don't care at all," which raises the obvious problem. If you could care less, that means you still care at least a little. The original phrase was "I couldn't care less," meaning it would be impossible for me to care any less than I do. Just emotionally bankrupt. I got no remaining currency of concern. But somewhere along the line, especially in American English, people apparently started dropping the "nt," which means linguists have had to argue about this for decades. Some suggest the modern version became sarcastic, like saying, "Yeah, I could care less." Others think it's simply language drift and people repeating what they heard. Either way, this argument has become one of those eternal internet battles right alongside of pineapple on pizza, the Oxford comma, and whether hot dogs count as sandwiches. It seems people will weaponize absolutely anything if left unsupervised. Now, this one's a bit sneaky, because people use it incorrectly so often that the incorrect meaning is becoming normal. I'm talking about begs the question. As in, the strange disappearance of all the office yogurt begs the question, who among us is the dairy bandit? But originally, the phrase came from formal logic and philosophy. To beg the question meant assuming the conclusion within the argument itself. Basically, circular reasoning. For example, this policy is effective because it works well. It's the same statement. The phrase traces back to translations of famous Smarty Pants Aristotle's writings. Possibly the most misunderstood phrase on this list, "The exception proves the rule." People often use this to mean, see, the existence of one exception somehow confirms the rule. Which doesn't really make logical sense if you think about it for more than 4 seconds. Originally, though, the word prove had a different meaning. It meant to test. So the phrase originally meant, the exception tests the validity of the rule. So like if a sign says no parking on Sundays, the exception implies parking is allowed on other days. The exception tests and reveals the broader pattern, and it makes way more sense. But over time, as the meaning of the word prove shifted in everyday English, the phrase drifted too. Then there's nip it in the butt versus nip it in the bud. It's a gardening term removing a bud before it blooms. Very common mishearing, although we really didn't need to get butts involved. Cold shoulder, supposedly from the medieval practice of serving a cold shoulder of meat to unwelcome guests instead of a hot meal. Straight from the horse's mouth came from bedding culture. You might check a horse's teeth to verify its age rather than trusting the seller. Getting caught red-handed comes from being caught with literal blood on your hands from poaching. Idioms are basically verbal fossils, tiny pieces of old worlds still clanging around in modern speech. Every time we say somebody missed the boat or spilled the beans, we're repeating fragments of lives long gone. Roman soldiers, medieval farmers, carnival barkers, drag queens. Humans disappear, but somehow these weird little phrases survive. That's it for idioms, guys. If you think of ones I forgot, feel free to leave it in the comments. It'll be fun to read those. I'll post sources in the show notes for anyone interested. Also, we're creeping up on Messy Minded's 1-year anniversary, and have got a really cool episode planned to commemorate it. Seriously, thank you guys for hanging out with me here for what I hope was some nerdy fun. I forget to ask this, but if you do like this show and want to keep it keeping on, it truly helps when you share episodes or recommend the podcast to the people in your life. Word of mouth is huge for little indie shows like this one. If you have suggestions for future episode topics, you can message in on the socials at messymindedpod or email messymindedpod@gmail.com. Later, skaters.